Good evening. I'm back with Karen Brewer. So we're going to start off now. Let's just run through like the cast of characters that have been the freedom fighters who have been misleading everyone for the past 2 years.
Yep, let's start with Voices for Freedom because that's always a cracker. Again, it's always the same two questions. Where did you go to school and who's your daddy? You've got to know that information about everyone.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a journalist, a television, a freedom fighter, whatever. You've got to know where they went to school and who's their daddy. Voices for Freedom.
Claire Deeks.
Claire Deeks, yeah. Funny story, Sid. You know, she's a lawyer. Yeah, she's a lawyer. And lawyers actually are well versed on the law and the process of law. You know, about how the politicians write the legislation and they pass it through their bullshit chambers and then they take it up there to the governor. And the governor's got to sign it before it's valid, right? Yeah, lawyers get all that training at universities, funny enough, yeah. Claire Deeks is a lawyer and she's also from Spotwood College. Interesting alumni list there for such a young school. And of course, Claire Deeks specialises in asking for donations, buying a T-shirt.
Oh, that's such a Freemason thing to do, eh? They've always got the donate.
You've got to brand yourself. Yeah. They want you branded. They like you branded. They like the profane. That's what we are. They like you in branding. You know, like cattle. So they want you to buy a branded T-shirt and a branded cap so that they can easily identify who the fuckwits are that are following them. And, of course, they get your money. They fleece you too, which is always a nice bonus. So that's Voices for Freedom, yeah. And then, of course, you've got the outdoors party with Sue Gray.
Yeah. Governor Gray.
Funny story, Sid.
Yeah.
Sue's a lawyer. Yeah, she's a lawyer. And lawyers are well versed on the law, Sid. They get a whole course about the law, funny enough, at universities, yeah. And as such, Sue's well versed on legislation into law and the role of the Governor-General plays in that. And of course, you'll notice Claire and Sue never telling any of their following about the reserved powers of the governor.
Well, Sue Gray's a pretty important player in this deception, isn't she? I mean,
yeah, she's out of Nayland College, yes.
Isn't she related to Jacinda in some way, shape or form?
I'd have to shake that family tree. I haven't done that one. Yeah. The fact that she's out of Nayland, I just moved on to controlled opposition.
Well, also just every time she goes to court and does a case, it's this constant. We can do something about this. I can do something about this. And yet the theatre plays on. Her little groupies hang out outside the High Court supporting her, and yet literally it doesn't matter what evidence they present, it never goes anywhere, it's never talked about in the news, it's theatre. It's theatre, yeah.
It's theatre, yeah. And of course you can get your outdoors party T-shirts, can't you, Sid? You know, a couple of hats, maybe buy a sign. Yeah.
I did notice when the marches were happening, or when it was still just, at the Civic Square down there, the sort of static protest and then the march protest, she's always there. Because I just went to everything and observed everyone, and I'd take her picture everywhere, and I was like, there's something not right about her at all.
Well, that'll be the Mason Inbreeding.
Yeah.
You can see it actually if you look at their photos and really look at them. You actually can see there's something off with these people, you know. And of course you've got
Chantelle and Leighton.
Oh yes, now Leighton Baggy's an interesting character. All it says is he went to a private school. It's got no name. That's a bit odd, isn't it? No matter how much researching you do. And of course he made his money supposedly after the Christchurch earthquake in construction. Interesting. And of course his daughter, Chantelle, yeah, she's making a name for herself now.
Daddy-daughter psyop. That's so Freemason.
Who's your daddy?
Yeah.
Who's your daddy? There are no coincidences here. These people need to realise the Masons are organised. There's a reason why there's a lodge in every district.
Yeah.
They are organised. The average Joe.
He's had a failed political career too.
It's not failed. He's being lined up right now to be the next wave. That's what all of them are.
Oh, they're all just.
That's what your Claire Deeks.
They're sitting in there going, just trying to work up votes or something.
It's exactly what they're doing, and because they're controlled opposition, people will get angry at the mainstream parties, and so they know that they will throw their votes. Well, they're hoping They will throw their votes to the smaller parties. The smaller parties are all Freemason de Molay, and you can research these people by knowing where they went to school and who's their daddy. You can never put a number in a box on a ballot paper unless going forward you have interviewed these people, you know their past, you've shaken their family tree. You've got to do the work, Anzac, because we have to get average Joes sitting in our parliament. When here in New Zealand, when you have 120 average Joes sitting in your central parliament, when you have average Joes sitting in your regional council, when you have average Joes sitting in every district and city council, we will turn these countries around in under 5 years. And it's the same in Australia. Average Joes know how to be honest. Average Joes know right from wrong. But going forward, you must never again mindlessly put a number in a box on a ballot paper. You cannot ever do that again. You must take the time to vet these people. Who are they? Where are they from? Who is their family? What is their history? Because you must get average Joes in your parliaments. You would be better off with the local checkout chick being your member of parliament. Those people know how to serve. You would be better off with the bloke that runs the local takeaway joint in your industrial area. Those people know how to serve. We must get servants of our electorate. No political parties ever again. And you've got to know who these people are. If I came to your house, Sid, today, right, and I said, look, Sid, just hand over your wallet. I'm going to play with about a third of it that's in there. While we're at it, I'll have access to your bank account too. I'm going to take a third of that. I'm going to tell you what you can and can't build on your own block of land. I'm going to tell you what you can and can't do with your own kids. I'm going to tell you what you can and can't do with your own animals. I'm going to tell you what you can and can't do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, chances are you'd say,
Kick off.
Probably. And yet people will rock up on polling day and they will put a number in a box on a ballot paper and give some unknown person to them access and authority over their lives without ever thinking about who that person is.
Yeah.
That's how we got in this bloody mess. So we can't do that anymore. Now, I'm just going to talk briefly about the role of a politician. Technically, we are told that our politicians are there to represent us. So when was the last time you walked into your local politician's office and asked for a new law or a new tax?
Never.
You've never done that. Well, and yet we have our politicians almost on a daily basis passing legislation after legislation after legislation. Now, if I haven't gone in and asked for it, and you haven't gone in and asked for it, where's all these legislations coming from?
The corporations that want them?
No, actually comes from the United Nations. You see those politicians go off to them United Nations
the
junkies?
Yeah.
You know, all these summits and forums they go to?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. There's a thing called the UNESCO, and that's the United Nations sub-branch for better policies for better worlds. That's their slogan. And what happens is our politicians go over to these summits and forums. And of course all these UN organisations, their job is to review legislation. And then they tell you politicians what legislation they want changed. And then our politicians fly back from their junkies and their state visits, staying in 5-star hotels and all expenses paid, and state balls and the whole box and dice. And they come back and they get very busy passing all this legislation through our parliaments that you didn't ask for and I didn't ask for. Then they'll come out on the 6 o'clock news with a news grab. Oh, we've had to change ABC because it's in line with the OECD guidelines. And of course, the people watch the news, but they never don't listen to the news, right? Because if you're listening to the news, you'd be saying to yourself, hang on a minute, who's this OECD?
Oh, no one listens to anything they hear on the news. It's just on in the background. Honestly, now they're like, and the numbers of people, and this many vaccinated people are in hospital, and this many unvaccinated people are in hospital. And you're like, that shouldn't be the other way around. And no one's they're just like tuning it out.
So we've had the amendments to, here in New Zealand, the Public Health Act of 1954. That got amended. Take a look at Section 70. Google it because you need to know.
This is the reason that I stand every day. When I found out that, like, my dog and my cats are basically my whole life. I haven't had an intellectual conversation with a human being mainly since COVID started because they're all fucking indoctrinated zombies. And to find out that when these amendments come in, they have the right to destroy infected animals. I'm sorry, you can. Like, I will be there every day until either they fall or they imprison me because no one is touching my fucking animals.
Mm-hmm. That's in Section 70. Yeah, they can just come along and say, you've got an infected animal, some local authorised Freemason, because there's a little loophole there people need to pay attention to. Anybody authorised by the medical officer. Well, for a start, you don't elect the medical officer. He's one of them bureaucrats. Yeah, he's one of them bureaucrats appointed by the politicians. And he's been authorised to authorise other people. And, of course, they'll be your local level masons. And they'll come around and they'll have you marked out as an unvaccinated person or whatever. And under Section 70, they can actually demolish your house. Yeah, you go over and look at that. They have the right to destroy any building, come onto any lands. They also have the right to prohibit any gathering, whether private or public. That's a bit tricky, that one, you know, like sometimes people might go out as a family to mow their lawn. You know, you might have a kid raking the leaves and you might have someone else doing the edges and someone mowing the lawn. Well, apparently that could be a gathering on a private dwelling. That's outlawed under Section 70. They can come around and round you up and they can say that your house is contaminated and they can destroy it. They can also, they've authorised themselves that they can subject you to medical procedures, regardless of whether it's consented to or not. Yeah, you need to go and research Section 70 of the Public Health Act of 1954. And they recently did the Section 70 amendments just last year, late last year, before the new year. Also, the Deposit Takers Act. I'll talk about that. Now, the Deposit Takers Act is what it's called in New Zealand. They're not even trying to hide it. It means exactly that. If you have a deposit in a bank or a trust or a hedge fund, KiwiSaver, the whole lot, the Deposit Takers Act is the right for them to prop up a bank by taking your deposits. Yeah, they just take them. Deposit Takers Act. Now, in that little act, you read through it, right? And it'll say, oh, but only if you've got more than $100,000, right? This is what they're using to get it under the radar. And, of course, what will happen in the weeks ahead is they'll amend it. Don't you love the way these politicians amend everything after they've passed it? There's amendments, another amendment. And so it'll go like this. It'll go from $100,000 down to $10. Or it'll go down to $1. And they'll just pass the amendment, and then they'll enact the Deposit Takers Act. And if you read through that, the procedure is the banks will be closed for a 24-hour period. In that time, your bank accounts will be completely wiped out. They will open up 24 hours later and you will be issued with a share in a useless, worthless bank. Yeah, it's called the Deposit Takers Act. Now, in Australia, it's called the bail-in laws. You're going to bail in the banks with your money. So if you've got cash in your bank account, I would suggest you take it out and stick it under the mattress, because at least then you'll be able to trade amongst yourselves. But it would actually be much better if you all stood up at your governors every day at 11 a.m. Because it's better to deal with this filth before the axe has fallen. once they implement the Deposit Takers Act or the bail-in laws in Australia, you really are going to be in a very bad situation, Anzac. You've got to get in the trench and fight now before these things unfold. And they are closing in with these abuses. Section 70 of the Public Health Act. New Zealanders, I beg you, please read it. Slow it down and read it one sentence at a time, because you need to know. They have the right to remove you from your home, remove your animals, burn your children, subject you to medical procedures. They have the right to quarantine you. They've given themselves all of these rights. And yet nobody that I speak to and have asked has ever said that they asked for this legislation. So where's it coming from?
Well, no one I've spoken to, I mean, you've even got the people like, yes, I think that passports are an overreach, but they're not doing anything about it. They're just accepting them as what they are. And it's like, wait, hold on a second. Is your vaccine effective? Yes. Well, then you don't need a passport. Is your vaccine not effective? No. Well, then you don't need a passport. And they're like, oh, okay. No, I go to pizza.
I tell you, it's impossible, just about impossible, to get any sort of service in Wellington. I'll just tell you a little thing that happened to me last night. I go down to this particular restaurant, I won't name it. I place my order, and there's this little punk sitting there waiting for his order, and he says to me, you got a mask? I said, I've got an exemption. And then I said to him, I said, I have an exemption, thank you for asking. Do you have a sexually transmitted disease? He shook his head and was like, oh. But I mean, the cheek of these people to think that they have the right to ask. And I mean, he wasn't even the business owner. He was just some little punk waiting for his dinner, and he thinks he has the right to assert his ignorance over me. You know, I mean, oh.
Well, the media has really done a number on people. I mean, even the idea that, like, I can put a mask on and take a drag from my vape and blow it and it just goes through my mask. I'm like, well, oh, the mask is saving me from air.
Sid, I like the analogy of a fart. You know, if the jeans can't keep your fart in, your mask isn't doing jack shit either. It's true. Yeah. It's true. You know?
I got my mask on.
I mean, it's beyond pathetic. And they actually walk around and they think that they're high and mighty. And I look at them and think, you're a compliant slave to a Freemason child raping network of filth.
Yeah.
You are the lowest form of scum because you don't know right from wrong. When you bow yourself down to obey people who you know are filthy, and we all know it. Every news article you read that's about this abuse, like the Northland sex trafficking ring, that 15-year-old girl was drugged and she was raped by 5 prominent members of Northland's business community. They drugged her, they raped her, they filmed it, they uploaded it onto their sick web, and your judges gave them between 6 and 12 months home detention. If that was your daughter, would you be happy with that justice? Do those judges represent what you believe is a fit and proper sentence for such an abhorrent crime? So you have to ask yourself, what's wrong with your judges? And this isn't an isolated case. I mean, you look at the Senator Heffernan's speech, he tells you of the filth that is the judges. Franca Arenas told you of that. Senator Heffernan actually gave 18 years' worth of speeches on the corruption inside the judiciary. There's like Judge Cullen was removed from New South Wales. David Yeldon was forced to resign early. It's not hidden, in a sense, you know it, and yet the Anzac allows this injustice to walk in and out of their parliaments
and does what they say,
and judiciary. And then when these same filthy people ask you to put a mask on, you're doing it. Okay, one day you're going to have to face the Creator. And you're going to have to answer to that. Because you already know they are perverted filth. It's more than enough documented evidence to show you that. And if you're still putting a mask on, one day you are going to have to answer to that. You really will.
What about Billy Tikahika or Billy?
When I first came across that bloke, I thought, I need to meet him. So I go down and I meet him in Whangarei, because I always like to meet them, right? First clue that there was something off was he was sitting at the cafe table, and the first move he made was this, right? This China peacock, make himself look bigger. I thought, that's interesting. And he asked me to go and speak at Aotea Square, and so I did, because I'll tell you now, Anzac, those documents that Senator Heffernan produced to the Royal Commission under an order to produce, they will name New Zealanders. They were involved in this. Anyway, so I went down there and I was talking to everybody about Senator Heffernan's speech and how you find the filthy Freemason. That was the first time. And then he asked me to go back there a second time and speak at another one of those rallies that he'd organised. And so I did. This was really interesting. I'm just about to take the mic, right? And he says to me, only talk about the stand in the park. Don't talk about the Freemason stuff. Have you just met me? Anyway, I get the mic and I do my normal, as I do. Yeah. I spoke about Senator Heffernan's speech, the network of Freemason filth, the 2 questions you ask, where did you go to school and who's your daddy? And if you actually watch that back, Vinny filmed the whole thing, but Billy was going live. And as soon as I started talking about the Freemasons, he cut the live.
Yeah.
And then it was about, was it the 24th of January, I think, that happened. And I immediately sent an email out to some trusted confidants that I have in Australia. And I just outlined what had happened. You know, I said I went down there. He said, you know, he said this to me just a moment before I'm taking the stage. And, of course, naturally I spoke about what I always speak about. I don't give a shit. I'm not going to be silenced. And so I'd already tipped them off about what had happened. And then it was about 2 weeks later, Billy sends an email out across all of what he thinks is the team in Australia. And in that email, right, he's saying to people that I'm mentally ill. Now, I've never actually gone public with that before. But, you know, I thought, why not, you know. As soon as when I've identified who they are and I've outed them, which I did, he had Michael Stace as he was his manager of that party. And, of course, that Michael Stace bloke was the Freemason publicity officer for 3 years. I actually had a conversation with Billy Tikahika about Tiamara Williams. I said to him, what are you doing making Tiamara Williams the deputy of your party? And he tried to play dumb. You know, they like to play dumb, these Demolays. And, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, well, she's born in Melbourne. Her father's a minister. As a child, she went to England while Daddy studied theology, which means working his way up the Freemason rituals. I said she was then educated at Samuel Marsden Collegiate in New Zealand here, and proudly boasts about the fact that in my 20s, I travelled through 45 countries. Really? Where'd all that money come from, do you think, Sid? Who's got the money to travel through 45 countries?
Freemasons live free.
As they do. They live free. Anyway, I took him to task about her, and I said to him, don't be playing dumb with me. I said, you know who she is, and so do I. Where did you go to school, and who's your daddy? And anyway, then he went on this rant in this email about I was mentally ill and everything else. And I've actually kept that quiet because I don't get into argy-bargy with these people.
Yeah.
If I'm not talking about someone, that's because I already know who they are. I will wait for you guys to catch up. Anyway, everybody saw the staged arrest that went on down in Auckland a few months ago. And I mean, how dumb. Like, he's going live, and he's going live, and he's actually saying to the coppers, hold me, drag me. They think you're dragging me. I guess it's all theatre. And I think a lot of people woke up to the fraud that he is after that.
Well, I mean, you have someone who disgracefully leaves the National Party and then forms a new party with Billy Tigahika.
Who's out of Dilworth College. Don't forget that Jamie's out of Dilworth.
Yeah, and no one goes, hold on, aren't you just from another party? Like, I mean, it's like, people don't go, where did these politicians come from?
It's a bit like the ball in the 3 cups. And you just move them around, but it's still the same 3 cups.
Yeah. Who else have we got? We've got the counterspin man. What's his name?
Oh, yes, Kelvyn Alps. He outed himself as a Freemason. He did that live on his show, Counterspin. Now, boys and girls, let's just think about the name. Counter Spin. I think that says it all. Yeah.
Why would he out himself as a Freemason on his own show?
I don't know. Maybe he was suffering from a bit of peacock syndrome or something. I mean, it was a fairly stupid thing to do. Once a Freemason, always a Freemason, and of course we know what they are. They are bred for purpose.
Lingo Louis.
Oh, look, this is funny, right? This guy turns up down at the gates here at Wellington. I don't know, a week ago? It was the first time I came down to Wellington. He turns up there and he says, oh, can I interview you? And like straight away there's red flags on this bloke. Like you can tell he's a demolay. Okay, you can tell. Anyway, I was like, oh, okay. And so I launched straight into it. I didn't give him an inch. It was straight into the Freemasons, straight into Senator Heffernan's speech, the connection, blah, blah, blah. It's funny, isn't it? Because none of that, he didn't put it on his channel. No. Lingo Louis didn't post it up anywhere.
Yeah. And keeps, whenever he sees me and David down at Parliament, he's always, buddy, and it's like, dude, like, we see through you.
We see you. Yeah. This is the thing.
He's also on his bike constantly. He'll go on his bike for a little bit and say, he's always got to go. He's in a hurry to go somewhere. I'm like, yeah, you're just an information gatherer, mate. Yeah.
Well, he'll be a little demolay. Poor bastard. He's not your typical demolay, though. He's rather unkempt. He's not your typical demolay when you look at him presentation-wise, but he soon reveals it in his lingo, funny enough. Yeah, in his lingo, you can pick it up quick, smart. As soon as people aren't prepared to, I've had people say, oh, can I talk to you or whatever, and so you will talk to them, and yet it never gets published. Poor old.
Well, he'll say things like, oh, you're not ready for that stuff. And it's like, dude, if you know what's happening, which you say you do because you've gone to China and, they love it because I talk in there. I know, that's such a demolay thing, eh? Like, well, they really listen to me because I talk to them in their own language and they just really appreciate that. And I'm
seriously, this is exactly what Sid is saying here is exactly the shit that Lingo went on with, right? Now, this is the thing you got to know about a demolay, a Freemason demolay. They only got the one script. They've only got the one script. So if you're asking them a question, they'll deflect. That's Act 1. Now, Act 2...
they're not ready for it. They're not ready for it. Yep.
Act 2 is talk about self.
They really just connect with me in my different language because I talk to them in their own language, yeah.
Yeah, when you're in China.
Yeah.
And they all listen to me in China and all this sort of stuff. Or like your Graham Hood, okay, because Graham Hood got a bit nailed because people are finally waking up to him. And so what's Graham doing at the moment? Oh, it's all about me and what I want to do and my wife and we're going to run this retreat and I. If you actually listen to some of Graham Hood's stuff, he's the Qantas pilot for those of you that might not realise. And he's an overnight success. There's no such thing. But if you actually listen to his videos, and I mean really listen, everything out of every second sentence is, You know, it's just ad nauseum with Act 2. And of course, Act 3 with the Freemason Demolay is always the same. Everyone's mentally ill.
It's funny though, because truly mental illness doesn't exist in the way they use it. Like, even
people, they use it to slander and silence
they just use
people.
It to make people feel like that. Oh, you know, to make other people turn off from listening to them.
Yes, they do it mostly to their own. Again, like Matthew Newton and Bert and Paddy Newton, they did it to their own son, and that is a standard procedure. Everyone's mentally ill. They just use that because if you can convince the profane, the average Joe people, that there's some sort of mental illness, you just make it up. And they hope that you'll turn off from listening. But that's not working now because everyone knows the 3 acts. It doesn't matter whether you are talking about current batch of politicians or you go back and talk about politicians or whatever from the past. When you actually review it, I'll give you an example of this. There was the whole Pauline Hanson, Tony Abbott back in the day in the 90s. And Pauline Hanson was sent to jail for a trumped-up charge and all this sort of stuff. And so you had this hate going between, you know, like the Pauline Hanson camp and the Tony Abbott camp, and, you know, everyone had their opinions. It's just all theatre to divide the masses. And, of course, again, it was trotted out, oh, Pauline Hanson's mentally ill. I mean, we went all down that path. Pauline's a Freemason Demolay, by the way. Her mother's maiden name is Webster. It's a funny name, Webster, you know. Then you got Alistair Webster, who was the superintendent of Durrock Boys' Home, and he later went on to become a federal politician. Alistair Webster, federal member for Macquarie, recently arrested on historical sexual abuse of the boys in Durrock. Of course, he's never faced court. No, keeps getting called over. He's out on bail. He lives in the Blue Mountains. And, of course, that keeps getting called over and called over. I think Alistair's about 88 or 89 now. They're just hoping he'll drop dead. There'll be never any justice for the boys in Durrock.
They'll sell him out once he's dead. Unless
the boys in Durrock stand at the side of the governors, you know, seriously. And, of course, it's funny how they're generational. Because right now there's the federal member for Mallee in Victoria. Her name's Anne Webster. And if you go and listen to her maiden speech, she says, I want to thank the many mentors in my life, including my uncle, the former member for Macquarie, Alistair Webster.
Thanks, Uncle.
Roger that. And then, of course, if you look and shake Scott Morrison's family tree, that's really interesting, because Scott Morrison's daddy, right, John Douglas Morrison, he's an interesting chap. He was the mayor of Waverley Council, as well as being chief inspector of Divisions 10 and 15 New South Wales Police during the era of Judge David Yeldham and all that stuff. It's funny how they're all connected. Anyway, ScoMo's grandmother, guess what her maiden name is? Webster. Yeah, Webster. Oh, it's a funny thing, isn't it? And you know, isn't it funny that the clerk to the Executive Council here in New Zealand, his name's Michael Webster. Webster. Keep popping up, don't they? And then if you go and take a little bit of a stroll through Bolton Street Cemetery, and indeed Simmons Cemetery in Auckland, oh, there's a lot of Websters there too. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd love to be able to fly back home and take a good walk through Rookwood Cemetery now with different eyes now that I can see, because I'll bet you there's a few Websters there as well. Yes, the exchange of pedophiles between New Zealand and Australia from colonial days to now is absolutely rampant. And you know how we were just talking about Sue Gray? Remember the outdoors party in Sue Gray? You know, in New Zealand, they had a Governor Gray. Yeah, they did. They also had a Governor Fitzroy. And that's really funny because in Australia, we had a Governor Fitzroy too. And you know those two governors? They were half-brothers.
Interesting.
And you know those governors? They approved the boards of trustees for those schools. And you know those governors, back in the day, they had to certify who was chosen to sit in the legislative assemblies because they had to be certified by the governor.
Yeah.
See the network of filth? Freemasonry is a breeding program. It is a breeding program. It is an inbreeding, backbreeding and crossbreeding program. They actually keep track of both legitimate and illegitimate lines of their breeding. And it's interesting when you research the name Fitzroy, because back in the day, that whole line of Fitzroy was created because one of them countesses, she was having a fling with someone that was other than her husband. And so they created the Fitzroy line out of the illegitimate line of royalty. Now, Sid, can I tell you a little funny story? When I went down this path of researching this Freemason network of filth, I came across this lady called the Catherine the Great of Russia. Very interesting woman. And see, back in the day, she thought she might want to get some of that education for the Russians, right? So she wrote to a couple of the rellos over there in England and says, look, you know, we might get some of this education stuff for the Russians. And so the English rellos sent over Patrick Gordon, a bloke by the name of Jacob the Bruce, who was Robert the Bruce's brother. Yeah. And France Lefort, French bloke. So they go over to Russia to set up the education system. Right. Well, after a wee while, Catherine the Great thought, oh, something's a bit off here, you know. A lot of abuse was going on in these schools and they'd interfered with her son. Anyway, she put two and two together. Well, she chucked all the Freemasons out. Yeah. She burnt down their lodges, burnt all their books, and ran all the Freemasons out of town. And of course, so began the hate on Russia. Russia, Russia, Russia. And then after Catherine died, her son gets on the throne there, and he thought he'd let him back in for a while, you know. Well, that didn't work out. After about 4 years, he'd realised he'd fucked up. So Nicholas chucks them all out of Russia again, burns all their lodges down and the whole lot. And there was a bit of to-ing and fro-ing with that. Anyway, the Western society was all commie, Russian, you got to beat up the hate, you know, yeah, because the history is the Russians went, look, this Freemasonry's a bit fucked, and so we don't want nothing to do with it. So you have to beat up the hate, you know, you had to have the hate on Russia. And of course, Freemasonry stayed out of Russia until 1996, when Freemasonry again made an entrance into Russia again, and of course, the Russian judicial system is completely stacked with the Freemasons now. And it's interesting, you know, isn't it? Because we're common denominator-wise, you know, your average Joe Russian, they dislike their politicians just as much as we do. Yeah? And your average Joe Chinaman, they dislike their politicians just as much as we do. And now I'm going to talk to you for a minute about the CCP party. Okay, everyone goes on about this communist China party. CCP. That's bullshit, okay? That's Freemasonry in China. Now, Freemasonry in China started up again in 1949. MacArthur.
Freemasons paid Karl Marx to write the Communist Manifesto. Mm-hmm. It's not communism, it's Freemasonry.
That's right.
It's a faction of it.
And after the Second World War, there was 5 families that were chosen to control the Freemason network in CCP. So whenever anybody's saying CCP, please correct them and say what you're talking about is the Freemason infiltration into China, which began in 1949 under General MacArthur, and it was re-established in China, and that's Freemasonry. The United Nations is actually the administration branch of Freemasonry. Freemasonry invented every religion. It controls everything you see, hear and read. Everything.
So does that mean, like, essentially like BlackRock and Vanguard, they're Freemason?
All of them.
Yeah.
All of them. We'll talk about religious books for a minute, if you like. The history of the Bible. A lot of people like to bang on about the King James Bible, and yet these same people will never do any research. Now, the Bible's actually been rewritten 3 times. The last time was in the 1500s, where it was rewritten, you'll never guess where, Switzerland. Yes, it was rewritten in Switzerland back in the 1500s. And of course, a lot of people do a lot of thumping about, you know, God bothering and stuff like that. And yet, these same people are not upholding what they preach. Let's talk about Matthew 18:6, which is about pedophiles, child rapists. Matthew 18:6. For the child that doth believe in me,
if anyone
harms a child that doth believe in me, it was better that a large millstone be hung about their neck and they be drowned in the depths of the sea. So, you also look at the Lord's Prayer, shall we? Thy will be done on earth. And yet the pedophiles are walking out of your courts. You all know about it. You're not, other than a who and a ha, you're not doing anything about it, are you?
Or even worse than that, people are like, oh, I want to send my kids to a good school, or oh, I'm going to.
Because they don't know.
Yeah, well, they don't, and then you're like, well, Freemasons run your education system.
They write the school curriculum.
Yep. They teach just absolute nonsense.
To the serfs, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. To their chosen ones, they get the useful knowledge.
Well, isn't it interesting? Yeah, I mean, that's where when you start realising, like, oh, so Freemasons teach the initiated ones that we live on a flat earth under a dome. And Freemasons run NASA. It's like, dude, we are fucked. Like, we're intentionally made retarded. And I say this stuff to people every day, and their first reaction is, and I'm like, look, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to fucking help you. I know what's happening. Like, you think you know what's happening because you did well at school. Well, guess what? School is for fucking retards.
It's to get you information. Yeah. It's not about education. It's about getting you in formation. 2 words. They want you in formation. Walking on the line. Never using your voice. Obeying authority. Ask permission. Raise your hand to speak. Raise your hand to toilet yourself. It's about getting you information, and people have to snap out of that. You've got to get in touch with 4-year-old you who knew how to use your voice.
Dude, that's wrong. I don't care what anyone tells me about it. It's wrong. I do something about it. Yeah, I'm a 4-year-old. I will happily say what I feel, and especially at this moment in time where like I'm trying to help. Like, I seriously am trying. Sometimes I just try so hard, and I get all of this, like, just grossness back from people, and I'm like, I'm so fucking exhausted. Like, I'm trying to fucking save your fucking life, and you're trying to tell me that I'm retarded because I don't believe what the news tells me. Like, come on.
And I like all these people. Like, I'll get hammered with trolls on my Telegram page, right? And I have the full gamut of emotions, just like everybody else. I get frustrated. You know, and sometimes that frustration shows. I'm human, you know. Don't like it, lump it. But at the end of the day, what I am telling you is the truth. That Masonic Lodge sits in every district for a reason, and they are the network of filth, and they are controlling everything you see, hear and read. They are even controlling what's going on in the beehive. They control every freedom rally. Which is why I'm saying to people, stop worrying about groups. Stay away from groups. I'm asking you to come into your own power. If you know what is happening around you is wrong, then stand and face your governor. Instruct your governor. If you know this corruption has to come to an end, I beg you, please stand.
Well, they're not going to do anything about it themselves. I mean, literally, they're just going to kill us off. I mean, I can see it now. They want. I mean, the last time they reset things, you can just see it's like they killed off all the parents. They put all the kids into orphanages. They mind controlled them through sexual trauma and all sorts of mind control tactics that they've.
And we all know this on some level, Sid, because most of us can only trace our ancestry back about 4 or 5 generations. And that's about it. That's all you know.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason for that. Wake up. We'll talk about that for a minute with a couple of things that you just brought up. We'll talk about the whole buildings and all of that sort of stuff. So you have a look at Sydney Town Hall. You have a look at Auckland Town Hall. have a look at the Victorian Market Square in Sydney.
Look at the exhibition building. There's no way that we built
exactly that. Now, the reality is horse and cart, no power tools, really small population in the time they say these buildings were founded. You notice they say they were founded? Found it. You get it? Laid a foundation stone. Right. Let's talk about things like your Empire State Building, shall we? Let's think about the name. Empire State Building. All these buildings were already here. There was a civilization. Otherwise, the very small population that we had in Australia and New Zealand and the like, they must have spent every waking moment baking red bricks.
Oh, the thing I noticed the most about the Empire State Building, even when they tell you, like, when you if you turn on Discovery and you watch something about the Empire State Building, they'll tell you they started building it at the start of the Depression. It was finished 6 years later. No, it didn't even take 6. It was finished like 4 years later.
Marvellous.
Yeah. In the middle of a fucking depression. I'm like, there is no way. You just, like, literally the economy just fell over. Oh, let's just build a fucking skyscraper.
And when you go and research any of these buildings, like, put something in the Google bar and just read about it from any source at all. Doesn't matter whether it's Wikipedia, a news article, a history book, whatever. It's always founded. Right? It's always founded. This building was founded. Slow it down. Found it. Founded. Found it. I'll give you another example of this, right, Sid? When we were in school, you were always told about history in the colonial days and how they were coming out, they were surveying everything. There was all these surveyors, you know. Bass and Flinders were surveyors in Australia, and, you know, you had Leichhardt and all these surveys. They were out surveying land everywhere, right? And they were doing the same here in New Zealand. This is only my second trip to Wellington in my lifetime. And I've got to say, Sid, these surveys must have been a bit dodgy, right? Because this is mountain goat country here in Wellington. I'm telling you, there's roads here that you look down, you cannot even see the road. They're that steep, right? It's nosebleed country. You'll look long and hard before you find a flat block of land in Wellington, I'll tell you that. So you got all these surveyors, all these colonial surveyors that came out, surveyed everything, and this is the place they picked as the capital. The survey's a bit fucked in the head, you know. Anyway, as you walk around Wellington,
the colonial story is ridiculous.
It's pie in the sky.
You've got these things.
Have a look at the buildings here in Wellington, Sid. Seriously, every street, every building, facaded with render, and yet there's always a bit of render falling off now. Guess what you see underneath? All red bricks, and a plaque, founded in whatever year, 1854 or whatever. And the amount of Tartarian buildings in Wellington, I mean, seriously, I could stay here for a month just to do documentaries on the buildings here. I would love to do that. But I'll probably be in jail next week. That might be over to you to do the Tartarian. But honest to God, you walk up the road here in Adelaide Street, you literally, every second building you pass is a skinned building that's a Tartarian building. You can see it. You absolutely can see it. And you go and look at the things the size of the Queen Victoria building in Sydney, for argument's sake. It's got your copper domes. The thing is a whole block long, right? Beautiful tiling and everything like that throughout it. And they did that with hammer and chisel, horse and cart, and a very small population. But they didn't just do the Queen Victoria building. You've got St Mary's Cathedral. You've got the Sydney Anglican Cathedral. You've got the Town Hall. And this is just Sydney, by the way. I could repeat the same story in Auckland. Auckland's really interesting because, they say from the Civic Theatre down to the quay, they say that's all reclaimed land. It's bloody marvellous, isn't it? Horse and cart, they managed to drag in all that dirt and they filled it all up and they packed it all down somehow with their horse and cart and hammer and chisel and a population of about, I think it was about 42,000 people at that time. And, you know, see, some of those people must have been
women.
Well, yeah, you'd think that some of them must have been farmers because they must have eaten something.
Yeah.
I know there's 42,000 people.
No, we just got off. We decided, hey, look, the first thing we must do is build, beautiful buildings.
Yeah, and you got to reclaim acres of land down to the so-called port that they supposedly reclaimed. Right. And yet down at the port there of Auckland, you've got this great big customs house all built in red brick. Across the road, beautiful GPO, just like the one in Sydney. Funny, isn't it funny how they all look the same, these buildings? Doesn't matter whether you're looking at buildings from St. Petersburg in Russia, right through to downtown Auckland. You know, up the road, Adelaide Street here in Wellington. You know, you look at some of the buildings in America. Look at the White House. It's bloody astounding. All these buildings all around the world all look exactly the same. At the same time, we're told.
Oh, you've even got these arches everywhere.
Yeah, the magnetic arches.
Yep.
I believe they probably are. You know, your Arch de Triomphe.
Yep.
In there in France. They got those too. They got them everywhere. You know, all built by a couple of people with a hammer and chisel and a Horton cart. Bloody marvellous. They don't make men like that anymore, do they, ladies and gentlemen, eh? Don't make horses like that anymore. You know, we got your big Hummers and your excavators and we got hydraulics, this and that. You still can't replicate this shit. You know what's wrong with people today, Sid? They don't bake enough red bricks. That's what's problem. I mean, these people must have just loved it. They must have done it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 65 days a year and never stopped. They loved baking red bricks so much, you know. And no matter where in the world, they're all red. They're all red brick. Isn't that bloody marvellous, that? Bloody marvellous.
It's also interesting that at the same time, you have these people teaching you, we were all living in these little shacks and we were, in America you've got they were all it's cowboys and Indians out here. And it's like, dude, but look at Chicago.
Those books, all them book stuff. See, now, when you're talking about any book, doesn't matter what sort of book, history book, fiction book, whatever, want to know the author's name straight off the get-go. And the first thing you want to know is where did the author go to school and who's their daddy? So let's talk about Gulliver's Travels. Remember that book about the giants?
Yeah.
You know, you had the giants and then you had the little people, right? Now, if you actually go and look at the author of Gulliver's Travels, that was a bloke by the name of Jonathan Swift. If you go and have a look at who Swifty's family was, it was extraordinary. Journalists, authors. It's amazing. Generational family of writers. Now let's just talk about that, Gulliver's Travels. So you got this giant, right? And this giant washes up on this island. That's what they say in the book. And then the little people are there, right? The little people tie him up. And then in the end they did him in because he didn't want to go and abuse the other people living on the other island that were also little people. Where do you think a story like that comes from? You know, it's really interesting when you look at those buildings. They
really love to hide the truth in
your
their
face, yeah.
I mean, I've been watching this TV show recently called His Dark Materials, and it's very science fiction, and now I'm like, this is the actual world we live in. They've convinced us that we live in this very boring, dull world where we go to school and earn money. But it's like, we live in an electromagnetic, a realm that, we could, if we had free energy, which is well and truly possible, our whole lives will be different. But instead of having that, we've got this constant cycle of working to pay for our bills.
Exactly. Entirely corrupt. I think that our time here in this level, right? I think this was actually meant to be a holiday. I think we were meant to be walking around, enjoying our environment, gathering our food and exploring and hunting what was created for us by the provider. I think this was actually supposed to be a holiday camp. But somewhere along the line, it got corrupted by this Freemason network of filth. And I think it's time we stood up to it and said no more. We know this network and you're done.
Well, the thing is, even if we don't, if either we stand up to it and we do something about it, or we just keep...
Well, they're going to cull you. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
We're all going to fucking die.
And it's physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually, they're culling you. Do you get it? And what's the common denominator? they're all Freemason Demoulay. It's not a coincidence. This is the network. And they built the bureaucracies that we call education systems. I mean, think about the word democracy. What it actually means is demon aristocracy, right? And the fact that Scott Morrison and your Malcolm Turnbulls will come out quite proudly and go, we can trace our ancestry back to the First Fleet. Damn right you can, because the only people that were on the First Fleet were all Masons. You see all those fairy stories that we're told about they were convicts and sent out for a loaf of bread. That's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. You go take a walk around your towns and you seriously start looking at the buildings that are around you, and suddenly you start to think, hang on, this can't possibly be so. The first time I went to Auckland and I walked up to the Civic Centre in Queen Street there, and I looked back down and I'm saying to my husband, so from here down to the water, we're supposed to believe it was all reclaimed land and that they packed it all down with horse and cart and built these monstrosity buildings right down Queen Street. Because there's so many Tartarian buildings down Queen Street, it's mind-blowing. And we're supposed to believe they did all that in about a 14-year time period. Bloody marvellous, that. No? Don't make horse and carts like that anymore, do they, Sid? You know? They control everything you see, hear and read. Every radio, every song that you've sung, every book you've ever read. They control the school curriculum, mainstream media, music, arts, science, health, entertainment, politics, sports. They control it all. Everything you see, hear and read. And I don't care who it is. Give me a name, any name. And then you go type that into the Google bar and read about these people, or DuckDuckGo or whatever. The two questions you're wanting to know every time is, where did they go to school and who's their daddy? Now, it starts back, the history, Sid. It starts back with a thing called the Order of the Garter. They started to get organised at the era of King Edward III, right? Now, what they were doing prior to that is they were hyphenating surnames. You know, so you had these people that had like 6 and 7 surnames as they tried to keep track of their family trees. It could be complicated. So they came up with this order, honours and order, right? So you have your OBEs, your KCMGs, your ONZMs, your OAMs in Australia. Yeah, that's the Order of Australian Molestation, OAM. And all of those people that have those honour initials after their name are all Masons. That's how they keep track of their family tree now. That's how you get certified by the governor.
So the Governor General has a list of all of her...
I believe so, yeah. They keep track of their family tree. They know exactly who's been bred from who. They keep track of both legitimate and illegitimate lines. And I know that because I went down the path of in-depth reading researching a number of politicians that had like a questionable history. Just a quick example of that is Bill Hayden. Okay, he was a politician in Australia, Deputy Prime Minister. And of course, he always reckoned he didn't know who his daddy was. Mummy had him, and he never know who his daddy was. He fucking knew who his father was. Mummy was quite young when she had Bill. She will have been a Demoulay victim that's, produced. Well, she wouldn't have been a victim. She's probably been indoctrinated well and truly by that point. Later in life, right, he always said he was an atheist or whatever. And later in life goes get himself christened as a Catholic. So that's Bill Hayden. But they're all come out of these schools, and that is their family network. Like Bob Hawke, he had an uncle and his father are politicians. It's the same thing over and over again, generation to generation to generation.
Here, every street name, Freemason.
Oh, absolutely. And so many streets in Wellington seem to have a Sydney theme to them. Like we had Adelaide Street, and that was one of the things I noticed in Wellington. There's a lot of sort of Sydney theme here. Yeah, anyway.
The other thing I thought was really interesting is people are like, the Hawaiians killed Captain Cook. I'm like, yeah, he probably raped their children.
That's exactly right.
There.
That's right. They weren't mucking around.
Because they didn't...
See, that's your thy will be done on earth.
Yeah, because they actually, people freak out when you're like, well, actually, they were like, they ate him. I'm like, no, they didn't. They thought he was really evil, so they like cooked him up and then crushed his bones. I'm like, well, why do you do that to someone? Oh, you do that to someone because they fiddle with your young ones.
That's exactly right. Matthew 18:6. Those that doth harm a little one who does believe in me, best that a large millstone be hung about their neck and they be drowned at the depths of the sea. So Anzac, to all you Bible thumping people, right? Number 2 of 10. Thou shalt not create graven image of anything in the sky above or the sea below. Thou shalt not bow thyself down to them, nor serve them. So I'm just going to talk about that one just for a minute. So all these churches, which actually were some sort of generators at some point, I've done a lot of research on that, all these stained glass windows in every church, and it don't matter what church. You've got moons and stars, you've got birds and fish. Thou shalt not make image of anything in the sky above or the sea below. Uh-oh! There's a bit of a problem there, isn't it? And then number 2, you continue on, thou shalt not bow thyself down to them, nor serve them. Right. First thing they do, they say to you in one of these dens of iniquity, let us kneel to pray. Uh-oh! Thou shalt not bow thyself down to them. You know what they do at the end of them church services? They pass around a plate. Yeah, wanting your money, don't they? Hey? Thou shalt not serve them. So let's just think about that for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Thou shalt not bow thyself down to them, nor serve them. And yet they created churches where that's the first thing they ask you to do. They created courtrooms where they expect you to stand on the entry of a black cloaked Freemason judge. As you leave a church, they're asking for your money. And here we are. They tell us the year's 2022. And we know what goes on inside all churches. We've had Royal Commission after Royal Commission after Royal Commission that tell you how every religion behaves towards children. Thou shalt not bow thyself down to them, nor serve them.
Any more interesting etymology things? Because I know etymology is probably more important than other parts of, like, people don't realise that the word is telling you every, like, people are like, oh, we've got a police force, and they're like, no, we have a chamber pot full of lice. Yeah,
police. Okay, Brendan Thompson, when I went down this path, like, I've learned a lot in the last 5 years. There's a guy in Sydney, his name's Brendan Thompson, and if you need to have a word explained to you, he's the best teacher I've ever met. And how to break down words and what they actually mean. Now, the word police, you go do this if you like. Go Google P-O, okay, define, and it comes back as a chamber pot. Then go define lice, L-I-C-E, lice. It actually comes back with a parasite that feeds on the flesh. That's what the definition is. So when you put the po and the lice together, you have a chamber pot of parasites that feed on the flesh. That's actually what the word police means. The word honourable, oh, that's a cracker. Okay. First time I came across Brendan talking about that, I was just like, oh my goodness.
It's gross, eh?
It's the word honourable, so you have to break it down. So it's H-O, ho, which is a prostitute. N-O, honour. So N-O means not any, okay? U-R means our. So the word, and then able means of those in power, right? So the word honourable actually means a prostitute, not any prostitute, our prostitute, and they're in power. That's why you have the Honourable Jacinda Ardern, the Honourable Scott Morrison, the Honourable Christian Porter. They're actually telling you straight to your face, I am a prostitute. Not any prostitute, their prostitute, and I'm in power. Honourable. You go define that word. H-O, define. N-O, define. U-R, define. A-B-L-E, define. A prostitute, not any prostitute. Our prostitute in power. That's what the word honourable means. So whenever you're in court, make sure you use the word Your Honour a lot. Yes, Your Honour, no, Your Honour, 3 bags full, Your Honour, because you're actually calling them what they are. And they are a prostitute to the Freemason network of filth. And of course, average Joe serfs, us profane lot, we don't get taught Latin in schools. They do. That's how they know what words mean. We talk, we think we know and we are saying what we know we are saying. But to a Freemason démolé who's been trained to bastardise language, okay, they just don't hear anything from us.
Yeah.
Okay, because they operate on this Latin bastardised version of English, and therefore they ignore you. As a matter of fact, we're into day 10, I think, up at the Beehive of those people being ignored, tugging on the rope, organised by the controlled opposition. Hold the line! Hold the line! There's no line there. There's no line. Line's at your governors. But all these people are there and they're tugging on the rope, you know, and I'm going to hold the line. They've been ignoring you for 9 days. You're getting tired of that, you know.
But even in that, you can see what's happening. You see, in Canada, Justin Trudeau's like, well, we're going to bring in the military to sort it out.
It's the same with Canada.
Like,
They've got a governor.
What are you doing?
Yeah, go to your governors. So, I mean, I've even spoken to a few people in Canada trying to explain this to them, but of course I think now they're controlled opposition, you know. But what you've got happening up there in the Beehive is you've got these people tugging on this imaginary line, right? They've got this tug-of-war rope.
So they've got the rope. We'll show up in numbers and they'll listen to us. We'll have a kai on the lawn. We'll have a dance party. People are getting killed every single day by the vaccine, but we're holding the fucking line. I'm like, no, you're not.
There's no line.
And I'm like, I love you. I think you're a beautiful person, but you're fucking stupid and you're being misled. Please help me. You've seen me every day standing where I stand. You've seen that I'm alone. You've seen that I'm a good person. You know me. You know where my heart is. But you still follow these people and they're like, oh, today we have in the crowd and they're in the mandates, in the mandates, in the mandates. And then they said, just manifest it. By the end of March, no more mandates. I'm just like, seriously, are you guys buying this shit? Like, how many times?
The reason they don't know is because they removed constitutional studies from school in the 70s. That's the reason why you don't know how your judiciary works. That was by design. They've kept you deliberately ignorant. And then you get people like myself and Lee and David and, Patricia and all of us and people like Brendan, and we're actually trying to put this knowledge in your hands so that you're no longer ignorant. You have a peaceful solution available to you. All you have to do is show up. You actually have to show up in the physical and press the doorbell. Now, they keep you deliberately ignorant. You'll notice no Sue Gray and no Claire Deeks, no Billy Tikahika, none of those people are talking about this. And I can tell you now for a fact, I emailed this information to them all March last year, including your David O'Neggses and all of that shit, right? So they've had this knowledge for a very long time. They've got very big followings and they're not doing a damn thing to educate you how to stand in your power. And you need to wake up to controlled opposition, because I tell you now, ladies and gentlemen, Anzac, if you keep following these people, they are going to throw you over the cliff. You must stand in your power. If you know right from wrong, then you front up every day, Anzac, for 2 hours. Together we are mighty. You know.
I find it very interesting because I think I hadn't even found you when I first started, because I was figuring out the network and figuring out how it all tied together, and I knew about their handshakes and all that sort of stuff. But as soon as you mention that stuff on a David Oneg's chat, you get 5 people saying, if you're watching people's handshakes, you're actually retarded. You're smoking way too much crack. It's like this big démolé barrage of like, stop looking in the right direction.
David O'Negg's, if memory serves me correctly, is out of St Patrick's College in Manly. Yes.
Yeah. they're just so obvious. Like, they're so obvious to me, but other people are like, you know, they're cool, they're like me. It's like, no, they're pretending to be like you.
People have been trained to be entertained and amused, right? And that's all that's going on with these so-called, what I call FDCOs, because they're just amusing you. People like Onegs gets on his skateboard and whatever, you know.
I'm going but won't go, guys.
But won't go near the governors. He's spineless, you know. You've got the whole crowd up here in at the Beehive.
They're listening to Brian Tamaki's lot all day long.
Oh yeah,
all day long.
It's and the mantra thing this afternoon, that was actually really disturbing.
Oh, that was a ritual.
It was. It really was. And it was. They create an environment there at the Beehive. These Freemason, they Malays, they create an environment of constant noise, so that you actually don't have a chance to think. I mean, they don't want those people to go, hang on a sec, we've been here for 10 days and we've been ignored for 10 days. Yeah. Keep tugging on the rope.
If they had a
If you let go of the rope, this is what happens in a game of tug of war, right? If you actually let go of the rope, the other end falls on their ass. You get it? So if all those people at the Beehive let go of that rope, walk themselves down to 1 Rugby Street, you'll have those writs issued by dawn.
Well, it's also a thing of like, that's the only hole in their story too. Because as soon as you have thousands of people standing silently outside the Governor-General's, you can't report it on the news, you can't say that they're anti-vax protesters, you can't actually say anything about it at all, and you just
instruct your government.
Yeah, and the thing is that it is her sworn duty.
That's correct.
It has happened twice in Australia before.
1932, the New South Wales Governor had to dismiss the New South Wales Parliament, and it happened in 1975 because they blocked supply, and the Governor had to dissolve Parliament, the Governor-General had to dissolve the Federal Parliament and go to a fresh election. And of course, you know, you were all just shuffling the cards and electing new Freemason Malays. But these writs will be different, because now the masses are awake. We know their network of filth, and it's time to tear it down. We know how to find the filthy Mason every time. Where did they go to school? And who's their daddy? And you find them, but you've got to know everything about daddy. You know, who was daddy married to? What did he do for a living? How many children did they have? Who were the grandparents? You're going to shake those family trees. And that's up to you, Anzac. You can never blindly put a number in a box on a ballot paper ever again. These people mean to kill you. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and financially.
And fuck your children.
Yeah. Mentally, emotionally, financially, physically. And you've got to wake up to that. Now, we'll just talk about a couple of things that go on in schools that horrified most Australians. Just a few years ago, it was a thing called the Safe Schools program. And Australians were outraged about it. Now, here in New Zealand, you have almost exactly the same thing. And it's called the Keeping Yourself Safe program. The most disturbing thing about the one here in New Zealand is it's the local coppers that come in to talk to your kids about vaginas and penises. Right? Come on. Come on. You must know this is wrong. The Keeping Yourself Safe program. It's horrifying. Look into it. You've got no business talking to children about anything to do with that. I'm going to touch on this briefly before we wind up. Sexual maturity is no different to any other sort of maturity. So when you're a baby, you learn how to roll over, you learn how to hold your head up, you know, you learn how to crawl and pull yourself up on furniture, and that all happens in a staged progression. And sexual maturity is no different. That's the reason why it happens over a 7 to 9 year period usually. Because, you know, as a girl, you think all boys are yucky until you're about 12. And then you'll think, all boys are yucky, except maybe him, maybe he's not yucky, right?
And then hold hands.
And then at 13 or 14, the brain will be wandering off to think, gee, I wonder what it's like to hold hands with a boy. Or I wonder what it's like to kiss a boy. And the reason that all happens at a progression is it's so that you can also work out for yourself what you like and what you don't like. And then you might get a boyfriend or whatever, and hands start to wander, and that's a process of learning what you like and what you don't like. But now, so corrupted and disassociated are our young people from courtship and love and developing relationships with feelings. Our young people today now think you swipe left or swipe right for gratification. It's got nothing to do with love or building a relationship or knowing somebody. That's how far we've allowed our human connection to be denigrated. We can't allow this anymore.
Well, it's turning us into them slowly, drop by drop, in a way that they can control, really.
And now they want to genocide you, you know. And it's an all-encompassing genocide. Okay, it's not just the jab. They are genociding you financially. So many small businesses have now collapsed. They are genociding you emotionally. They are genociding you psychologically. I mean, you've only got I cannot actually stay up at the beehive for any longer than about an hour and a half, because the toxicity there is astounding. The noise, and the noise is important in blocking you, okay? Which is why they had to, create radios, and families that once used to communicate with each other, teach their children how to sew or knit or sing or whatever. They were now sitting around listening to a box that was placed in the corner of the lounge room. And then they escalated that, and then they invented television. Tell lie with your vision. And so then you had families sitting in a lounge room, not talking to each other. And now they're not even looking at each other. They're looking at the idiot box, where they're booming out all their masonic shit at you, and it's got to the point now where they have denigrated society to such an extent that men and women no longer appreciate the differences in ourselves, okay? You had the whole feminazi movement come up, the burn your bra and all this shit, and you can have everything that everybody else, every male has, and all this stuff, right? Whether you like it or not, males and females are here to do different roles, yet we complement each other, okay? So your male role is protector and provider. Your female role is nurturer, right? And so my grandmother was one of 13 children. So clearly my great-grandfather had absolutely no trouble loving my great-grandma. Clearly they liked each other a lot, right? Now, they denigrated society to such a point now. Here we are in 2022. Our young people are so financially abused. Many of them aren't having children until they're into their 30s because they can't afford it, because the politicians drove the cost of living up through the roof. Clever plan, eh? Because now our young people have babies and they're looking to book their kid into daycare because they've got to get back to work to pay the bills. This is how clever it is, right? So each of us only have so much energy per day as such, right? So you've got the young mum, she's had the baby, right? And so she's got to be back at the workforce, working 8 hours a day, right? And she comes home and she's exhausted. And then you've got the father, the husband, coming in, and he's been out doing 8 hours work of physical work, more than likely. And he comes home and he's actually needing some respite. He's needing some TLC. He's needing some care and regeneration, right? And of course, back in the day of my great-grandmother, she'd been busy with the kids all day, but when hubby came home, she was glad to see him, and clearly they liked each other a lot. And nowadays, the woman's coming in, she's physically and mentally tired. She actually doesn't have the ability to supply the nurturing that the husband needs in order to be able to get up tomorrow and do it all again. And so the marriages start to break down, don't they? In the 70s, the 80s, the family unit, The feminazis, oh, you've got to have a career and you've got to do this. You got to do that and you got to do something else. And now they've got to the point where they make the mums that sacrifice to stay home to raise their kids for those years, they make them out to be like the enemy.
Yeah.
We're fucked up society here, people. Okay? Now, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we've got to go back to some sanity. And the only way you're going to get that is to put average Joes in your parliament. Average Joes know right from wrong. Average Joes know how to be honest.
And we're talking about at every level, right? Town council.
Oh, every level. That's why I say you've got to issue the writs for fresh elections, plural. Now, in New Zealand, your Governor General holds the reserve power to dismiss all levels of government, which is your state, district and regional councils and your central parliament. Now, in Australia, it's a slightly different structure. Each state and territory, the territories have an administrator, same role as a governor. But in Australia, the state governor dismisses the state parliament and the councils. That's their role. Federally, the Governor-General dismisses the federal parliament. It is very important that every governor is surrounded. We want all of them gone. All levels of government, all at once. We, the average Joe people, we are going to be the reset here. Make it happen, Anzac. Stand before your governor, ring the doorbell, use your voice, instruct your governor. We've lost confidence in the government. We instruct you to dissolve Parliament and issue the writs for fresh elections, plural, now. We're going to go back. What I would like to see is that there needs to be a commitment to revoke all legislation back to 1900. That will immediately get rid of all the courts, puts us back into common law, gets rid of all their demonic bloody legislation, all their bureaucracies. It's just a really quick fix. And then going forward, you would just have the average Joes to work out what sort of things you actually needed to go forward.
I have faith that there's a lot of common law people out there that are really good. They just have this
average
idea
Joe
that...
people know, eh? Yeah. They know, average Joe. I'm telling you now, any corruption, evil, demonic shit these people have been doing, I really hold faith that average Joe people can find a solution to everything.
Yeah.
I really do believe that. You know, average Joe people like David and Sid and, you know, a whole lot of really average Joe New Zealanders, I believe you put them in all levels of your government, you will problem solve everything. But you've got to get active in knowing who your candidates are. You can never again blindly put a number in a box on a ballot paper, and the same for Australia.
On the political promises of they might do this or they might do that.
No, they're not. Their job isn't to promise anything. A politician's job is to do absolutely nothing until a constituent walks in and asks for something. That's their job. Their job is to represent you, not to represent the United Nations, their Freemason headquarters of filth, not to represent a WHO or anything. The technical job, the Westminster system of government would actually work if you had average Joes sitting in your parliaments. Because technically and legally, their job is to do nothing until you, the constituent, walks in and asks for something. Yeah. So don't be frightened, Anzac. Make sure you put your hand up, because going forward, we're going to be at about 9,000 of them in Australia. You know, you've got to count your local councils, state parliaments and your federal parliaments. And here in New Zealand, you're going to need to get about 2,500 people organised really quickly. Average Joe people. So if you're a checkout chick in a supermarket, you know how to serve. Put your hand up. If you're an average Joe, small business owner, maybe a truck driver, you know, you want some truck drivers. Those people know about logistics.
Logistics,
yeah. You want a couple of builders in there, some electricians, you know, average Joe people.
Totally, yeah.
Average Joe people, couple of taxi drivers.
Accountants.
Oh, yeah, vet your accountants, does. Yeah, vet them, right? You want to take a look at the business logos, right? Seriously. concept of 3, concept of 4, and again, where did they go to school and who's their daddy? You're not electing anybody unless you know where they went to school and who's their daddy. And anybody that's dodging that question, red flag them straight away. You can't answer that question straight up with no bullshit, you're out of the running. And you got to be that tough, Anzac. You got to be that tough. You got to vet these people. You got to know who they are. And if you don't have a candidate that you are 100% sure of, then you be honest when you vote. You draw a line through every name. No suitable candidate to follow my will. You be honest when you vote. All these people that have been throwing away their votes all these decades, you know, oh, I don't know who to vote for, so I just vote for anyone, or Joe Blow said this person, or whatever. You got to stop doing that shit, man. These people are walking into your home. They are walking into your family. They are abusing you, your family, your community, and your country. You got to vet these people. And I mean vet them. You're going to know these people. You are going to shake their hand. You're going to talk to them. You're going to interview them like they were an employee. Because that's what they're doing. They're applying for a position that potentially can abuse you. So you're going to vet these people, Anzac. You are going to front up and you are going to quiz these people. You are going to know who they are. And you're going to make sure you get an employee that knows how to serve you. Never again doing political parties. Never again.
I think we might leave it there, right? Yeah.
Thank you,
We're doing all we can, literally. You're paying tax dollars through the roof to these people who are poisoning you, wanting to put 5G on you, making you wear masks everywhere, and people who literally just out of the goodness of their own hearts are trying to help you. You mock, you ridicule, you follow these people that give you lip service and concerts. They're giving you bread and circuses now on the lawn of Parliament, telling you that they're going to end a mandate that's not even in the power of the politicians to lift. It's being enforced by the corporations. And even if they do lift the mandates, people have been conditioned so much into this new normal by now. I guarantee you they'd take the mask mandates off, you're still going to see all of those fucking zombie sheep wandering around.
The masks are a ritual.
Yeah.
That's a Mason ritual.
I'm compliant. I am obeying.
They want you silenced. They want you apart from each other. You know what happens when you're near each other?
You got an
whether
auric field.
Yeah, whether you know it or not, you're actually connecting on a spiritual level. When you
eye
shake
contact, hands, smiles. You've already destroyed children's development a whole bunch by putting their faces behind masks. I mean, I'm very deaf, so I lip read a lot, and I cannot understand what people are saying at the moment. Anyway, it's time to go. We're trying the best we can. Good luck.
Stand, Anzac. 2 hours a day. You can do it.